Welcome back, everybody, to Just Keep Parenting. So grateful that you joined us today. I just got back from the first ever Fred Rogers Life, Legacy, and Context conference back in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, which is where he was from. And so as I've been contemplating how to move forward with Just Keep Parenting, I've looked at a couple of books that I absolutely adore, but I just kind of feel like I'm still floating on a high with Fred Rogers and what I learned and felt at that conference. So what I'm going to do is move forward with some things that I learned about that about Fred Rogers, about life, about parenting, teaching, and with this book that is called When You Wonder, You're Learning. And it's a book, they've entitled it Mr. Rogers' Enduring Lessons for Raising Creative, Curious, Caring Kids. So it's a book by two gentlemen, Gregg, Behr, and Rydzewski. And anyway, I've just been devouring this book since returning from the conference, and I just want to share a little bit. So we're going to go with this book. We've started with a few books. We started with Easy to Love, Difficult to Discipline, and I've shared that with lots of parents here. But I want to share this one. So that's what we're going to do. Let me just read you a little bit from the foreword. The foreword was by Fred Rogers' wife, and she said, "It was November 13th, 2019, World Kindness Day, in a world where kindness is hard to find, where more and more people feel hardened and messed up, whether by politics or poverty or the ever-growing gulfs between our neighborhoods and ourselves. As Fred's wife of 51 years, I'm often asked what he'd think about this coldness that's crept across our country. And I always say the same thing. Fred Rogers would think, first and foremost, about the children. I think those tiny babies, which she referred to, there were 6 of them, made us stop and do the same. I think they showed us that despite the cold, kindness and warmth can endure. Swaddling in their sweaters, they showed us that even though Fred had gone to heaven some time ago, he'd left us the neighborhood's blueprints. And we can rebuild it wherever we'd like, even in a hospital nursery on a frigid November day." So that's what I'm going to be about as we move forward with Just Keep Parenting, is building a better neighborhood. And we have to go back to the blueprints, right? And so as I think about how I want to move forward, we want to think about something. One of the Fred's favorites quotes came from The Little Prince. And it says, what is essential is invisible to the eye. And Joanne kind of talked about that. Like, we just saw Fred, right? We didn't see the hours and hours of work that he had gone and talked with other people about, like psychologists and child development specialists and all kinds of scientists. We didn't see all the work that he'd put in behind the scenes to create Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And so I love that what is essential is invisible to the eye. And so thinking about our lives, right? Thinking about parenting and our relationships. What is essential, right? It's probably invisible to the eye. One of the thoughts that just keeps hanging on is I went to one of the classes, and this gentleman, Art, had met Mr. Rogers back in 1987, I think. And one of the things that Art asked him was, I can't broadcast like you do. How do I touch the world? How do I impact the world if I can't, do what you're doing on TV? And Fred said to him, "Please don't underestimate the power of narrow casting." And I love that. I've been thinking about what does that look like in my life? How do I narrow cast, right? Because I'm not going to be able to broadcast, right? I narrow cast here in the lab school. I narrow cast with my teachers. I narrow cast in my neighborhood. I narrow cast in my religious congregation. I don't broadcast though, right? And I love the fact that he said, don't underestimate the power of narrow casting. So what are we doing to narrow cast in our lives as parents, as aunts, as neighbors, as a congregation, as a member of a congregation, right? In our jobs. How do we narrow cast? So just some thoughts. Moving on, one of the quotes that I saw at the Fred Rogers Center that is still clicking around in my head said, discovering the truth about ourselves is a lifetime's work, but it's worth the effort. I just love the fact that Fred was all about children, right? But really, as I sat there with those 150 people at this conference who had been impacted by Fred Rogers' life, and there were old, there were middle, there were young people there, I just thought, you know what? It is worth the effort, right? Discovering the truths about ourselves. So, in this book, on the first chapter, it talks about how Google decided that they wanted to go and make start a project. It was called Project Oxygen, right? Because they wanted to see what was going on, because most of the people were saying, oh, kids these days, right? We say that every generation, oh, kids these days. But what they found in this was that kids were the same, right? Inside ourselves, kids were the same. Whether it was 500 years ago, we were basically the same. 1,000 years ago, we all had the same needs, right? So they talk about this Project Oxygen, and I like to think of it when I teach it to my students is that it's hard skills and soft skills, right? So Google did this Project Oxygen, and they decided that it wasn't about the hard skills. It wasn't about all the alphabet letters. It wasn't about the numbers. It wasn't about all of that. What it was about was the soft skills in people, right? So here he says, let me just quote it to you. He said, it's about kids discovering their potential and their purpose, becoming more fully themselves. It's about raising creative, curious, caring neighbors and citizens, people who can build stronger, more inclusive communities and a more just and loving world. To thrive in such a world, kids will have to be able to make sense of it all, discerning what's true, what's useful, and what's relevant to their lives. Then he goes on to say, it's the same lesson we've eventually learned in Pittsburgh, right? Which is where WQED, which is where they filmed it. At about the time that Google was briefing its statisticians, a group of parents and educators here were conducting a sort of Project Oxygen of their own. And so Gregg, one of the authors, had invited lots of people to come and just talk about what we can do to make things better. And pretty soon it grew and grew and grew and grew. And they had all kinds of people from all aspects of life coming to talk about what can we do to have the blueprint in our neighborhood. So as we move forward with this book, we're going to think about, how can we remake our neighborhood? How can we do what Fred Rogers said? Rogers himself was asked why his educational television program didn't focus on facts, on letters, numbers, fractions, and spelling. He said, I would rather give children the tools for learning, he responded. If we give them the tools, they'll want to learn the facts. More importantly, they'll use the facts to build and not destroy. What ultimately matters, Rogers once wrote, isn't how a person's inner life finally puts together the alphabet and numbers of his outer life. What really matters is whether he uses the alphabet for a declaration of a war or the description of a sunrise. His numbers for the final count at Buchenwald or the specifics of a brand new bridge. The neighborhood may be off the air, but its lessons are as relevant as ever. To thrive in the age of the algorithm, kids today and their parents too will have to excel at what Rogers taught best, being human. So let's move forward. Let's see if we can remake this neighborhood as we read, as we talk about the concepts in this book. One of the quotes that I absolutely loved at the conference was something that I've been working with the Fred Rogers Institute for the last year as part of the educators cohort. Said early in his career, Fred Rogers had listed 6 necessities for children to learn. That's what we've been focusing on this year. Number one, create a sense of worth. So I want us to think about our parenting, our teaching, right? Does it answer these questions? Does it create a sense of worth? Does it create a sense of trust? Does it spark curiosity? Does it have the capacity to foster you to look and listen carefully? You got to look carefully. Anyway, I love that song. Number 5, does it encourage the capacity to play? And number 6, does it allow for moments of solitude? So as we look at our parenting, as we look at our teaching, as we look at remaking our neighborhoods, right? Do we have these 6 necessities as we move forward? So my last quote that I want to share with you from the conference is, empower children with tools for exploration and learning, discovery, and connections. I love hearing teachers ask open-ended questions, and I might put parents, aunts, anybody who's working with children. Open-ended questions like, I wonder what would happen if. Remember that you don't need answers to all questions. When you nurture children's curiosity, they'll be interested in learning by noticing, predicting, exploring, experimenting. Their discoveries might open your eyes too to some fascinating things about our world. Let's go, everybody. Let's remake our neighborhoods. Until next week, thanks for joining, and I like you just the way you are.